Welcome to my budget deck channel where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible. So if this is something you'd be interested in, then why not subscribe? Today I had another look at a flip based deck because I'm really into the flip monsters since I found out that Tindangle have a card that supports flip decks and also makes them do more than just set one card and basically pass, and that is the card that is henceforth known as the good Tindangle, because this card actually has a lot of stuff going on, but I will be going over this in a second. First of all, if you want to make this deck a tiny bit cheaper, you could cut one Naelshaddoll Apkallone. You don't need it. It's just kind of good in this deck because you like to have as many Shaddoll Fusions as possible, and this card kind of interacts with some of your trap cards, so I decided to include it into the deck profile. And you could technically cut one of Allure of Darkness, but also go over this card and why you probably shouldn't. Other than that, this deck isn't too expensive, especially if you already have the Shaddoll core. Plus, with the Shaddoll core itself, you can do so much and play so many different decks that I feel like the investment shouldn't be too much. Starting out with the deck list, one Shaddoll Falco, because this card starts your massive conga line of cards that can summon each other back and summon themselves to the field. You know what I'm talking about, because this card can set one of your Shaddoll monsters, and so can Wendi, and so can Tindangle Angel, and so on and so on. There's so much you can actually do with this that it's already a bit insane sometimes. Secondly, we run one Shaddoll Hedgehog. Technically, you kind of want to run two, but the space in the deck is really tight, and that is because you kind of need to run a somewhat heavy trap lineup, because this deck is quite control-y, because otherwise you will be ending your turn with setting one or two monsters in face down and not doing anything else if you run more flip monsters, and that is not what you want to be doing, obviously, because we don't play in a format that is very battle-oriented these days, or basically ever, unless you've been playing since 20 years. So you kind of need another stuff that gets you to actually have your opponent go to the battle phase and run into your monsters, or be scared of them and don't, and then you flip them during your turn, you know, whatever works out for them and for yourself. But that is why we have to only run one Shaddoll Hedgehog, because otherwise the deck gets a bit clogged up. We run 3 of the good Tindangle, because this card has 2 effects actually that matter very much in this specific deck, and that is being able to send one card to the graveyard and discard one card. Sadly, the discarding the card does not trigger the Shaddoll effects because it's for cost, but it is like that. Otherwise, this deck would be a lot better as well, but it's already good enough. Its first flip effect actually, because you can take one flip monster from your deck and then either add it to your hand or send it to the graveyard. So you can actually send the Shaddoll monsters during your opponent's turn, which makes you obviously be able to do multiple different things. You can pop a spell trap, you can banish cards from your opponent's graveyard, you can summon one of your Shaddoll monsters from your deck. There's so much you can actually do that is kind of crazy. So this card is a very, very, very good card. We run one Reeshaddoll Wendi. You can technically run 2, obviously budget deck and all. Try to include as little super rares as possible. So 1 is usually fine because you have so many cards to actually get it back. Even if your opponent banishes it, you can still get it back with Ariel, and you can get it back from your graveyard with Incarnation. You can get it back from your graveyard with Angel. You can summon it out of your hand with Angel. You can get it back from the graveyard with Falco. There's so much you can do to get this card back onto the field and overuse its effect till the point where you actually run out of Shaddolls in your deck. So this should be fine running at 1. We run triple Squamata because this plus Shaddoll Fusion is basically like a very strong combo in combination with Construct and such. Well, maybe not with Shaddoll Fusion, but actually with Shaddoll Construct in combination, because you can send a card to the graveyard with Squamata, you can send a card to the graveyard with Construct, and then you can go on, have the whole Wendi into Ariel into Incarnation combo, which is quite nice actually, because you can then banish stuff, summon stuff, and it keeps going and going and going. Your resource loop is incredible. One Shaddoll Dragon, because this card can pop a spell trap, which is quite nice because spell trap removal is quite important, since control decks are mainly the matchups that you have a chance in winning. Usually that is the kind of decks that will not have like enough monsters on board to OTK you or actually break through your lineup of flip monsters during the first turn, so they will either have to attack into them or leave them up, and that's when you want to have some cards that deal with it. Obviously it's not always that easy, but you have to deal with the fact that one dragon should be enough. Spirit of the Whirlwind, a card that I would usually not want to be running in flip decks if it wasn't for the good Tindangle, because the good Tindangle is actually a card that still does stuff, when you search it out, because the other flip monsters, obviously it's a bit counterintuitive because you kind of want to set them, but if you already normal summon a monster to search them, you cannot set them, so it only works in very specific scenarios where this card would work. And since the good Tindangle came out, this is a lot different now, because you now actually can search a card and it doesn't matter. And if you already have this card, you can search the other Tindangle cards that you then can discard with the good Tindangle and actually do stuff with. So this card helps you kickstart your plays. You see, I like to make a deck profile where your plays are not just limited to, oh, I drew an incredible hand, look, I can upload a replay now, it looks great, this is when the deck works, and 9 out of 10 other times the deck does absolutely nothing. You set one card, you pass, but obviously you're not going to see that in a video because everybody only shows like the good replays. And I try to make a deck that might not have as of a powerful ceiling as some of the other deck lists would have, but where you can at least play the deck in most games. It's very frustrating to just constantly have to quit till you get one duel where you completely pop off, because it doesn't feel as good to pop off then anymore, because you've already had these like other 5-6 duels beforehand that where you could absolutely do nothing and your opponent just stomps you instantly. So I like to obviously make a deck that does stuff most of the time, even though you don't win every game, or you hardly win any game against like any competent deck like that's any meta relevant or above gold. You'll have a very hard time, but you can still play this deck and still do stuff most of the time. This is what I kind of strive for with my decks. Coming up, Tindangle Angel, very good in this deck because you can summon flip monsters from your hand or your graveyard, and if it's triggered in the battle phase, you can actually end the battle phase, so this card does so much. I would run it at 3 if I had the space, but 2 is usually fine, especially since you can summon it back with the Delaunay multiple times, so this card is quite nice. We run one Naelshaddoll Ariel, you know, the water gal, because this card can get stuff back that is banished, and this card can disrupt your opponent's graveyard plays, which is especially great against stuff like DPE and against Eldritch stuff, for example, and sometimes against Sky Striker stuff as well. So this card has a multitude of usages. We run double Shaddoll Beast, and that is simply for the fact that if you want to, this is one of the cards you mainly want to be summoning with Wendi, at least in my opinion, because this is your massive draw engine for this deck, because you can reset this card over and over and over again. You can dig through your deck, you'll always find the card that you need once you get your play started, and that is very, very impressive. Also, 2200 attack isn't actually too bad, so it's also not too terrible, and it's a level 5 monster which can help you go into rank 5 as well. So I like to run this card too. Obviously if you draw it, it does nothing, but you have enough cards where that doesn't matter if this gets stuck in your hand, and a 2 should be fine. If you feel like 1 is enough, then swap this out with a Wendi or with whatever, a Hedgehog or a Dragon, whatever you feel like suits the deck more. Even with one Tindangle Dholes, which is a card that you can be running at 2, first of all, again the whole budget thing, you only need it at 1, but 2 would probably in the long run be a bit better, because you have so many ways of sending this card to the graveyard. With Shaddoll Fusion even, that's a possibility. With your good Tindangle, obviously this is a way to send it to the graveyard, so there's that. We have Dinomischus to send it to the graveyard from your hand, that's always great. So this card could trigger quite a lot, but usually it's fine at 1. The fun fact about this card is also that not only its second effect, where it summons a card from a Tindangle monster from your graveyard, which mainly want to be Angel, but sometimes can be the good Tindangle as well, is that the flip effect, you can send 1 spell trap from your deck to your hand, not just Tindangle. You want to mainly send Delaunay, but you can also send Incarnation, you can send Lost Wind, you can send Shaddoll Fusion, then add it back to your hand if one of your Shaddoll monsters died that you summoned off of Construct before, so you gain that kind of stuff as a resource. So this card does actually a lot of stuff, and a card that I would suggest you could be running is Titanocider, because this card helps you in the long run, because it always comes back. Lost Wind comes back once, this card constantly comes back. If you send it to the graveyard with a Duels, that is quite funny against certain decks where the extra deck matters quite a lot. Evil Twins and stuff, if they don't pop it, if you do a time where it works, then this card can actually be quite annoying for certain decks. 1 Tindangle Intruder, because this card is great. You have so many ways of triggering this card in the graveyard to constantly summon itself that you'll be running out of Tindangles in absolutely no time, because you have Shaddoll that summons itself back or someone else back, you have Wendi that can do these kind of things, you have Angel that does this kind of stuff, you have Delaunay technically that does this kind of stuff, and you have enough other Tindangle monsters so this card triggers. You have the good Tindangle that does this kind of stuff. You have so many cards. You have Incarnation that does this. So you have a multitude of cards that summon themselves in face down defense position. So this card will always trigger from your graveyard, and it's easily sent to the graveyard with the good Tindangle's effect and with Shaddoll Fusion. So I really like this card, at least at 1 in the deck, because it at least builds up a defense wall sometimes, which is quite important, and it gets stuff like Needle Sealing Live, which can be very neat as well. We cannot get around running triple Allure of Darkness, I feel, because this card, it does something that is very important in these decks, where you kind of run a lot of monsters because you kind of want to find the important ones, but monsters also kind of brick your deck. This is basically the opposite of a Pendulum deck, where you kind of need a lot of monsters for the Pendulum mechanic to work. Here you need 1 specific or 2 specific monsters in your hand, and the rest kind of should be spell traps that do powerful things, so you actually survive your opponent's turn. And this is where this comes in. If you have a card that breaks your hand, if you get double the good Tindangle, or double Squamata, or like 1 Shaddoll that you don't need, especially because you can summon them back with Ariel, then this card actually does quite a lot, because it gives you the opportunity to draw into a power card that you need for your opponent's turn. Shaddoll Fusion at 1 is fine, because you have so many ways of sending it to the graveyard, actually, that this comes up quite a lot in the grind game, that you can add it back to your hand constantly, and if your opponent plays an extra deck focused deck, then you can use it from your hand, deck and even more, use effects from your deck, and so on. And for a budget point, you only need 1 of this card. You wouldn't really want to play more than 1, because it doesn't do that much going first, especially if you don't manage to draw into a Shaddoll monster, then this card is basically dead. So being able to have this as a tech card in here that you can easily get to your hand is actually sometimes a lot better than running it at the full 3 amount. Lightning Storm, a card that's very important, and I don't count this towards the count because most people will already have 1 of these, and this card is very neat, because like I said, the good matchups that you can have are also your bad matchups if you don't run cards like this, which are control decks, and most control decks kind of screw you over with their back row, so you need a card that takes care of all of their back row, and Lightning Storm is one of these. Obviously Harpies, Feather Duster is a card that you could be running, but this works against both kind of variants, and usually if your opponent screws you over during their turn, you will have an empty board, so you will be able to use this again, because you don't run any continuous spell traps and stuff, so this should be absolutely fine running it in the deck. And also, by deck thinning constantly with the effects of your flip monsters and drawing into stuff like Shaddoll Beast, you will be able to draw this card eventually, so 1 isn't actually that terrible, especially from a budget point of view. So yes, this card has helped me out of a pinch a few times with this deck so far, and I feel like the ratio isn't terrible for the fact that we are running a budget variant. Torrential Tribute is a very important card in this deck. It obviously doesn't synergize that well with the whole Tindangle stuff, because the whole Tindangle stuff, they are not protected from being destroyed, and also the problem is that they don't get any effects by being destroyed, but the Shaddoll monsters do. And since you won't have that much of a board presence, especially at the start of the game, it's always good to have this card as like a turn ender for your opponent, and then you can still do stuff with graveyard effects and other effects that you still have in hand for the next turn. If you don't like this card, there's obviously other ways. You can play hand traps. Maxi comes to mind, Nibiru comes to mind, and stuff like that, even though Nibiru kind of has the same problem again, just a bit different. You can run whatever you want. I feel like this card is a good game ender, a turn ender at least, so you can buy some time to get your flip stuff going, and you minimize the game state a bit, slow the game down a bit. So Torrential Tribute was a card that helps, plus you can trigger your Shaddoll Seconds effect, which is a lot of the time is quite nice. At least we run triple Needle Sealing. Is a bit of a hit or miss sometimes against obviously control Z decks. This card does nothing, but a lot of the time it actually works out, because you can already summon like 2 or 3 monsters during your turn, even during your first turn, if you get into the good Tindangle, for example. And then this card doesn't destroy your monsters, because it doesn't destroy set monsters, and you can actually, like with Torrential Tribute, buy yourself a whole turn, and it doesn't even harm you that much. Obviously, if you don't get any monsters on board and your opponent doesn't summon 4 monsters, then this card does nothing. But yeah, it's a good budget option to keep your opponent off of good cards. Dynamiscus, a card that gets stuff into the graveyard, which is important for Tindangles and for Shaddolls, because this actually triggers the Shaddoll effect, because it doesn't discard for cost, which is why I like this card quite a lot. And its removal that at least doesn't destroy, so you can get rid of certain things. You have a bit of a problem with cards that cannot be targeted and destroyed. There's not that much you can do about them, because you don't run like crazy high attack point monsters. You'd have to go into Raster Liger and boosted its attack with one of your link monsters in the graveyard, but that shouldn't be too hard as well. One lost win because you can send it to the graveyard, you can discard it, there's so much you can do with this card, and it sets itself back, so it's okay in the grand game. Double Delaunay because in the grand game this is good. This card doesn't do anything because the first effect you'd have to run the link monster of Tindangle for, but the Tindangle link monster does nothing in this deck because you don't run Base Gardener, and you don't want it to run Base Gardener because it doesn't really do much in this specific variant. So the first effect is kind of useless, so we mainly want to be discarding it with the good Tindangle or sending it to the graveyard with this Tindangle. Yeah, it is what it is. I even had it at one point that it was the last card in my hand. I activated Allure of Darkness and then discarded it with the Allure of Darkness. That worked out as well. The Paleozoic card can send it to the graveyard. There is stuff that works. You have Knightmare Phoenix if you want to get rid of back row stuff. So this card shouldn't brick you too much. And at 2 it's still fine, so you should not be drawing it at 2 all that much. So I feel like that would be the right ratio, but you could cut it down to 1 if you like. One Reeshaddoll Incarnation because this card is great. It can summon stuff back, it triggers Intruder, it also can flip your monster, which is quite nice, and it isn't limited to the Shaddolls, but it's actually working for Tindangle, so this is quite nice. Dogmatika Punishment because extra deck monsters are, against common belief, not of great necessity in this specific variant because well, you kind of stall for multiple turns anyway. The game will drag on for multiple turns, so it doesn't really matter. If you can keep your opponent of one important card for them, then giving up your extra deck for 1 turn isn't actually that bad. And if you combine it with cards like Allure Darkness, for example, then you actually get more pops out of this. As far as it is right now, you'll be sending Apkallone a lot of the time, or some high attack point cards, possibly like Decode Talker. Usually you don't want to destroy high attack point monsters. Naelshaddoll, or the water one, is a good card that you can send if your opponent's monster has a bit more attack. Problematic again if your opponent's monster has like 3k, there's no card you can send. You could be running stuff like if you run cards like, I don't know, Topologic Bomber Dragon for example, you could be doing this. But yeah, I didn't want to build my extra deck around this, but obviously there's cards that you can see you can cut Proglio and run like one of the Blue Eyes fusions that has lots of attack if that is one of your concerns, that you couldn't pop an important card with that as well. For the extra deck, some of the Shaddoll monsters because well, they're quite helpful and most of them have good effects. We run one rank 4. This is a good card to bounce your opponent's extra deck monsters with in the grind game, can be quite nice. Sometimes that's the only way to get rid of an important boss monster from your opponent. Volcasaurus because you can easily do this. It can attack the turn that it burns and it can finish off your opponent with the burn damage. So don't underestimate this card. For a cheap card, it's actually quite useful, especially in this deck. Double Construct, this card is very, very important. You can special summon it and basically use it as link 2 to link climb because it doesn't lock you into fusion summoning, which is quite nice. Also, you can easily use it because it requires 2 flip monsters, so you can use the Tindangles as well to actually go into all of your fusion monsters. Knightmare Phoenix, it's a nice card for this card. Obviously, with the whole link climbing or the Shaddoll Construct, you could also run stuff like Nightmare Unicorn, but this is an ultra rare, so I did not want to include it. Stuff like Trisbania is also very important because, like I said, back row, very, very annoying. Cards you could be running, Subterror Behemoth Fiendus, very, very good card in a grind game in a flip deck, but an ultra rare. And for game finishers, Access Decode Talker. For link 4s, maybe Appaloosa, maybe Topologic Bomber because it's quite easy to trigger and you can keep your opponent off of cards, so that can be somewhat nice. And the rest of the cards are literally just like free good stuff that you get anyway. Raster Liger can be quite nice. Decode Talker can be nice. Decode Talker can be nice. Geonator Transverser can be very nice because you can swap positions with your stuff, which is sometimes quite funny. Things you could be running is Evenly Matched because this card also somewhat shuts your opponent's turn down unless they can OTK you, then it doesn't, so that's a bit problematic. Obviously Max C paired with some other hand traps is usually not too bad if your opponent doesn't play like a deck that doesn't special summon Flunderies. So yeah, there's cards that you can be playing and the cards that you should be playing, and I went over all of them, so you make the decision in the end. Hope you enjoyed the deck profile. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, but hopefully you have a good day.